Hi and welcome back. In previous videos we've looked at the problems we have with colour, how we measure it and how we determine how colour works with our cameras and our camera sensors. In this video we're going to look at 5 ways we can make colour work for us in our image making. So let's get started.
Number 1. Setting the hue of your image or white balance to set the overall mood in the image. And we saw in our previous discussion on colour and the issues with colour how our brains are really good at fooling us into believing that what we see as white under different circumstances is really white when the lighting is quite different. But in a photograph, particularly when the photograph is mounted and displayed on a wall, our brains take the overall white balance of the environment into account, and then we view the image and see how the colour balance differs. Now, in this photograph of Nelson Falls in Tasmania, the image has been adjusted to give a neutral white balance on the water in the falls. But if we were to adjust the white balance to give it a cooler feeling overall, the mood changes entirely. We now have a waterfall that gives us a really cold, wintry feeling, whereas if we accurately balance the white balance, it doesn't quite look right. So the take home from this is the white balance need not be accurate to give the right result for your image. And so let's look at another alternative. This iceberg taken in Greenland has an overall cool balance and has been processed accordingly, but we could in fact add a little bit more blue into the image and it makes it better. But if we were to adjust this image to give an accurate white balance based on a neutral midtone, it looks terrible and it's all wrong. So you need to look at the image, set the white balance to reflect the mood that you're trying to portray. And this also applies to portraits. This royalty-free image by Christopher Campbell that we've looked at previously has a fairly neutral overall colour, but if we were to warm it up slightly, you can see that instantly this young girl in the portrait has taken on a much more vibrant personality and is much more interesting. But if we were to go the other way and cool her down, all of a sudden she takes on a very different feeling and has a real coldness about her that's reflected by the cooler colour tone. So take home from this is adjusting the overall hue of the image sets the mood of your photograph, and you can then go on to adjust the other colours accordingly. Number 2, using selective saturation to emphasize the important parts of your image. In this image taken in Tasmania, we've used a little bit of extra saturation in the reds to emphasize the foreground. If we remove that, we see that the separation isn't quite there. By adding back that extra bit of saturation, you can see that it does help separate the colors and give you a more sense of depth. In this image from Iceland, the same thing has been used. Increase the saturation of the foreground to emphasize the depth in the image and also draw the viewer's eye into the image. And another one from Tasmania, where the original image didn't show a lot of separation from the background. By doing some processing of lightening and darkening and increasing saturation and then giving the background a slightly different hue, we've managed to separate the important parts of the image quite well from the background. And in this image that we've looked at previously, we've painted in a little bit of sunlight using a colour fill layer just to add that extra bit of brightness and colour in the foreground to draw you into the image. And a final example, this image from Greenland, we've used a little bit of extra saturation on the sides of the mountain to help bring that forward and emphasize the size and the importance in the image. Without that extra colour, it's a little bit flat. By adding that extra bit of colour, we help to balance the blues in the image and also give it a little bit more dimensionality. So using selective colour can help emphasize the important parts of your image. Number 3, use warmer colours to bring things forward and cooler colours to push things back. Previously we've looked at how this works with our colour perception, and we can use this in creating our images. In this image, the warmer tones of the mountains come forward and the cool tones of the water push backwards. But let's have a look at a couple of others. In this one of the beach at Minamara, the warmer colours come forward, the cooler tones push backwards. And if we look at this one taken in Iceland, by using the warmer colours of the church roof and the church body, it sits forward, and then the cooler, softer colours of the background push backwards, helping to give our image three-dimensionality. And we can see the same thing with this other small town in Iceland. If we look at how the image looked to start with, it looks pretty flat, but by emphasising the colours, the warmer colours of the red building seem to pull that building forward, and the cooler colours of the old church in the background and the other old buildings seems to push backwards. And this is something that we can use in all of our image making to give our images more dimensionality. And in this one we looked at before, the warmer colours in the foreground come forward, the cooler colours and the less saturated areas push backwards. So using warmer and cooler makes a big difference. And in another example, this old half-buried farm building in Iceland looked too lush and too green, and I wanted to emphasize the feeling of bleak isolation in wintertime. So by removing a lot of the green colors and just leaving the yellow flowers, the flowers push forward, the window frame pushes forward, and all of the other colors push backwards to help again emphasize the story and give it more dimensionality. Number 4, using warmer highlights and cooler shadows to emphasize the color separation. In this example of the beach at Minamara, we can add a selection based on the shadow tones of the area and give it a blue color, and select the highlights and give it a warmer color to emphasize the separation between colors. So showing you the selection of the shadows, we can give that a blue color using a color fill layer. Now here we've put it in at 100% opacity. We wouldn't use it like that. We would drop it down to around somewhere less than 20%, and that gives a subtle shift of colors into the shadow areas. And likewise we can select the highlights of the image, and you'll see there that I've masked out the sky and the horizon area, but highlighting the rocks that are lit by the sun, we can add in again a color fill layer. But if I increase that to 100%, you can see where the extra color has been added in. We wouldn't leave it at that. We'd bring it down to somewhere around the 20% mark, depending on the image. And so we can add that little bit of extra sunlight in the highlights and cool down the shadows to give a little bit further color separation. And looking at this example of some kelp on the beach in Western Tasmania, we can do a similar thing. We can select the highlights using a color range selection and give that a little bit more warmth, and again dropping the opacity down to make it a very subtle adjustment, and likewise selecting out the shadows, we can give that a subtle cooler color just to emphasize the color separation. You can see down here in the bottom part of the image where the color separation is most noticeable, because things in shadow will be lit by the sky and things that are in sunlight will be lit by the sun, so they will have a different color temperature. Again, it's a case of modifying this to get the result that you want. Number 5, after we finish adjusting the colors and the saturation, we can adjust the brightness and contrast. If we go back and revisit our girl that we looked at earlier, we gave her a little bit of extra warmth to give her a little more character. But if we then lighten her and darken the background, that helps to really lift her out of the image and make her stand out. So if we look at how the image was originally, and with those extra adjustments, it really does make a big difference. And I know that we're strictly talking about colour and we're using curves adjustments, but just remember that when we talk about doing curves adjustments and we start to increase or decrease the brightness levels, we do have an effect on the colour. And the same thing goes for our example here at Minamurra Beach. If we looked at how the image started, by adding not only colour but then adjusting brightness at the very end, we've really lifted the image up. And the same goes for the image taken in the forest in Western Tasmania. By increasing the colour, selectively saturating and then adjusting the overall brightness, we can really separate our subject and give it emphasis. And this final example from Greenland, adjusting the colours, the saturation and then finally the brightness and contrast, really helps to put the last touch to the image to make it stand out. So here you have it, 5 ways that we can work with colour to improve our images. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.